Kia ora. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ro rangatira mā. Ki te mana whenua, tēnā koutou. Ko tā Paul Callaghan te tangata, ko Callaghan Innovation te whare. Ko Rosalie Nelson, toku ingoa no whakatū ahau. Ko te General Manager Strategy ahau o Callaghan Innovation. Māori ora. And thank you so much for making the time to come back. I'm very conscious that I have just followed Andy and the team at Red Shield, who have been blowing up computers and talking about rubber duckies. And I am now standing here between your time with networking and having a drink. So I'm going to try and be as pithy and as fast as I can. What I really want to talk about is take this opportunity to do a bit of a stock take. All of you today have heard and seen some incredible leaders, some inspiring stories, and you can see that there's a real thriving ecosystem that is occurring here. The question is, what's happening right across New Zealand, and is it really enough yet to move the dial? What do we need to do as a population to really see innovation drive the change that will bring not just the economic and the social outcomes that New Zealand's looking for, but also that cultural change, really give us the resilience and the agility to be able to deal with everything that is coming our way, particularly around technology disruption. So our namesake, Sir Paul Callaghan, had the view that 100 inspired entrepreneurs can turn this country around. 100 entrepreneurs with $100 million businesses, we'd probably now say billion-dollar businesses. So the question is, how do we begin to unlock that? And what I want to do is actually just begin to talk about where we're seeing some of the green shoots of change. The challenge with this sector is that there really is not a lot of data. So we're having to pull together a number of different data points here. It is going to improve in the future. But I'm just really highlighting what we're seeing in our startup ecosystem, just for starters. And we know that the system is growing. Now, this is just measuring angel investment in 2017. And what you could see is there was $86 million that was invested in just over 100 companies. And you saw actually less deals, but there was increasing value. So we have now been defined as having an ecosystem, a startup ecosystem that's in the activation phase. Now that's an early phase, but nonetheless, in comparison to other global markets, we're in a good place and we've actually got a lot of great foundations there. One of the things that was interesting, and you will have heard a bit of this today, is how much is actually going into the software sector. So that is attracting around about 53%. The IP-related technology and innovation is always longer and is always harder. So that's getting a smaller share, but you've got 53% in software and services and 12% in tech hardware and equipment. We're also seeing growth in the quality and the quantity of startups. Now, this is something that I actually stole from New Zealand Venture Investment Fund. So we don't have everything on here, but what we can see is that we are getting more companies, some great New Zealand companies that have been valued at 100 million and up to $1 billion. We do have a challenge, nonetheless, that we are seeing, and there's a lot of debate around this, is that how many of those companies are really in that difficult position of having to either move offshore or to go offshore to raise capital and perhaps to sell out early. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with raising capital offshore, and there's nothing to say that there's anything wrong with moving offshore, but to be forced to do it simply because we don't have the depth of capital here in New Zealand, that becomes a challenge. We have increased R&D investment. Now, R&D is a bit tricky. It's not really an outcome, but it is a measure of what's happening within the innovation sector. And what we can see is that from a low base, we've had about 7% growth in R&D spend between 2014 and 2016, and we had another round of about 255 million that was spent in 2017. So relative to a lot of our other comparator countries, we're actually growing faster in our R&D spend, and it is being driven by business as opposed to government or tertiary institutions. So that's actually a positive. Our challenge is that we're still about half of that of the OECD. And if you're looking at other countries like Israel, we're at about 1.3% of GDP. Israel's around about 4%. So there is a way to go, and this is something that the government is really looking to address with the R&D tax credit, but there is more that needs to be done in that space. In terms of who's actually doing R&D, we see a very similar pattern start to emerge. 11% of businesses, be still my beating heart, it's about 4,600 are saying that they're spending on research and development. Obviously, you'd like to see a lot more, and it's around about 100 of those that are making up 68% of the spend. So there is room for us to grow there, and about 42% of that is coming from this very large category called science and technical services and professional services. Actually, a lot of that's in the digital space, whereas 36% is manufacturing, and about half of the manufacturing spend is going into food and beverage. And then you get to about sort of 10% with wholesale. So what we can see is that we've got a stronger pipeline. There's around about 1,000 startups sort of annually, potentially a lot more. That's always a point of debate. We're seeing increased seed investment, which is really important, growth in the quality and quantity of startups, increased investment in research and development, and we are also seeing ambitious and talented founders. So there was a startup genome project that interviewed 190 of our startups, and they compared us to Silicon Valley and Melbourne and Sydney and Tel Aviv and other countries around the world. And what they noted is that we're actually really high on our global ambition. Our founders want to change the world. Where there is still a challenge is actually that management experience and also the targeting of where some of the really high value markets are. So it's that strategic focus that they really can get support with. They have a startup and scale up success mindset, but there is still a challenge that they're not well connected into the local and global ecosystem. And this is something I'll talk about a little bit further. And then we also have strong science and technical capability, but we don't have, as yet, there's some great work being done, but that track record of great commercialisation that's emerging out of it. So we would say that we're actually seeing some really great bright lights and success stories, but we have so much more that we have to do to achieve our potential. And from the point of view of Callaghan Innovation, there's effectively about two audiences. There are our startup community with the entrepreneurs that want to go global. They're born to export, they have big ambition. We need to support them and also get out of the way rather than try and wrap them up too much. But then there is also the rest of our small businesses and our large businesses that need to adopt and adapt innovation in order to be able to remain competitive and also to remain relevant with all of the technology disruption that we can see occurring internationally. So we have to manage both, and this is where we start to see some of our burning platform. Challenges in export growth and productivity. Our exports as a percentage of GDP are really under pressure. And we can also see those two lines up the top there are our primary products, unprocessed and processed primary products. That dependence remains a challenge. And even though we are diversifying the base, we're not doing so at enough pace and enough scale. And that does leave us really open to disruption. And I can imagine that if I had conversations around this room, there would be some of you that would say, oh, look, we're not really going to see disruption in plant-based proteins and those things for another 25 years. And others will say, look, it's going to be 5 years. We know that it is actually coming, and from our perspective, it's coming sooner rather than later. Our New Zealand business overall is ill prepared for technology disruption. There's a survey that's done by MYOB, and it asks companies, which of the trends do you think will impact your industry in the next 10 years? And the largest one was improved connectivity, effectively broadband. To me, having come from that sector, that was really the problem of 5 or 10 years ago. It is in the process of being resolved. What I get concerned about is all the wave of technology change that is coming And how are these small businesses going to cope with that? When we were compared to Asia, we could see that most of our businesses do not use social media for business. So they're not turning up even where their customers are. New Zealanders are one of the highest users of social media, yet so many of our companies are not even turning up on that platform. We are amongst the lowest to expect to introduce new products, services, or processes into market. And we're not doing a great deal in terms of online or e-commerce. So our challenge here, in summary, is that we've got a lot of businesses that are effectively in a point of stasis. They're not connected into global value chains. They've not necessarily got ambition to grow, but they're not under competitive pressure to exit. And what we need to do is look at how do we begin to fuel demand and get them on that innovation journey whilst also supporting our startup community. I wanted just to bring this in because we did this as an innovation challenge, and we had a look at what the world was like in 2040. Now, all of these trends, I would say, are going to occur. It's just perhaps a case of timing. But for 2040, AI everywhere, 47% of jobs being automated. Yes, there's going to be a whole lot of new jobs and tasks that will be created. But the challenge with that technology disruption is that the benefits flow up and the risk flows down. In other words, we need to have the people with the skills and the adaptability to be able to take advantage of that. Our largest markets, China, India, the US, but we're going to be seeing a lot of Africa and Indonesia and Brazil, different markets, different tastes and requirements. And then, of course, we've got all of the impact of climate change, the impact of disruption on supply chains, the fact that 50% of all cars sold are expected to be autonomous. All of that shift together actually requires us to really begin to skill ourselves up in that cyber-physical space. So yes, we've got great software skills, but how do we also prepare for this next wave where we have virtual reality, where we are tying in your nanotechnology to the solid-state sciences, when we are doing machine-to-machine and Internet of Things and marrying that with our world of software. And as we talked about, there's a low investment in R&D despite recent growth. Business spent $1.6 billion in R&D in 2017. Now, the government has set a goal. They'd like us to get to 2% by 2017. That means we're going to have to double that spend. We have to get to around 3.3 billion annually. And we're also probably going to have to get a doubling in the number of businesses that are doing this. Now, it's part of the reason for doing the R&D tax credit is to try and stimulate that. But we're still going to have a challenge. We're a small country. We've already heard about the risks of talent. Where do we get the resources and the talent to be able to do this? And how do we, as a country, begin to collaborate and come together so that we innovate like a city of 4 million rather than a long, thin, widely distributed country of 4 million? And our connectedness and capital remains a challenge. We do have a divide. We are poorly connected into global ecosystems. And what's quite interesting is that there is a correlation between the relationships and the connectivity that we have into global ecosystems and the customers that we have offshore. So how do we better connect in and get access to that expertise and that collaboration? The local ecosystem being highly fragmented. This was one of the findings in the Genome Project, that actually where you have communities that are really tight and highly connected, you get 2 times faster revenue growth and FTE growth. So there is actually an opportunity cost, and we found when we were doing the research I was doing the research for the 5-year strategy for Callaghan Innovation. The challenge is that if you don't get access and well connected in, then you're not getting the help necessarily at the right time in the right way when you need it, and it can slow you down, or you can find that you've made costly mistakes that you then have to go back and rework. So this is part of how do we better connect. It's been fantastic hearing the stories of connection here in Canterbury and to hear how well that's doing, but we have to be able to take that at a national level and then also see how we take that internationally. So, what are some of the levers and the change that we need? So, we would say a part of this is more ambition to go global. more ambition to export, and more ambition to go after some of those big and audacious markets. We have it with a lot of our founders. How do we make that wider? How do we get that DNA functioning more broadly here in New Zealand? And a part of that is us talking about success, and also, I would say, having a more nuanced conversation about what success looks like, including our attitude towards successful exits. Because in many ways, actually, it's the successful exits that attract the attention and attract a lot of the resource here. So we have a challenge, and we have to find a way of having a more balanced conversation about when companies are forced to move offshore very, very early simply because they can't raise capital here, which is probably, we would say, the negative, compared to those where actually there's a time where the idea, the technology needs to scale. It's going to struggle to do so from here. But hey, we've got great founders, and they're going to stay here and do their next idea, and then their next idea. So how do we start to have a more nuanced and sophisticated conversation around going global and what success looks like? That strengthening of local and global connectedness. And I think one of the things that's come through as well is how do we have meaningful connections? It's great to have sort of coffee catch-ups, but how do you use that in a meaningful way to really drive change and relationship, and therefore those sort of serendipitous opportunities that come. Improving investment capital for scaling. I know I've heard it a bit today, and I'm sure that all of you have. We do have a gap in our New Zealand capital market, particularly between that sort of 5 to 20 million space. There is not a lot of capital for what is regarded as high-risk innovation, investment. And I think that remains a challenge. Yes, there is still capital for companies, but if you're having to work that hard to raise capital locally and you can go offshore and do it within a short period of time, that creates a challenge. Increased investment in R&D. This improvement in management capability, I think this goes back to how do we ensure that we get the right mentors for our teams, and that rather than just focusing on the technology, we're putting that equal emphasis into the leadership growth and capability and scaling from 2 to 20 to 200. Activating innovation in established business. This issue is sort of fueling demand. It means that actually we need to start having a really robust and evidence-based conversation. I sometimes feel at the moment that so often with business, they'll say, yes, well, we do innovate, and we do have Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 products. My experience often is that's the first thing to go as soon as there becomes any kind of revenue squeeze or pressures on the business. And it's all too easy for us to just walk slowly backwards with our hand raised against the rise of technology disruption. So we would like to have a different conversation around that. And a part of that is how do we better connect established industries into the startup community and research institutions and firms. And I know that as I say this, some of you are going to be sitting there going, but we're doing this, and we're doing this really well. And I know there are many great examples. Our question is, how do we scale it for New Zealand so that we really begin to deliver outcomes? The role of Callaghan Innovation in this. We've really just got 4 pillars to our strategy, and I'm not going to go into great depth, but we want to help facilitate that conversation about what New Zealand will look like in 2040. What's our burning platforms? What are our opportunities? And how do we all align as an ecosystem to really go after those? And then fuel that demand, but also ensure that we're bringing together the talent and the people and the resources and the R&D infrastructure to be able to do that. How do we connect that ecosystem? Some of that's going to be around technology, but some of this is also around the cultural thing of not sort of going, hang on, if I told you my idea, I'd have to kill you. It's how do we open up some of that and build those meaningful relationships, and also liberating innovators. For us, one of our challenges that we can see is that for a lot of businesses, they have no idea how to navigate even basic government services because it's complex. Certainly when I came in, I couldn't figure out exactly what Callaghan did and how that sat with NZTE. And I can imagine if I asked some of you to put your hand up, you'd find yourself in exactly the same position. These are fundamental, foundational things that we need to get right and we will be working on over the next year. So there's a lot of initiatives that we'll be working on with that. But if I was to say, in essence, our goal is to de-risk this process, is to help be a partner and give you pathways for that commercialisation success, and to also accelerate your time to market so that we're not losing time. What does innovation success look like for New Zealand? We actually asked this of a lot of people. The interesting thing that came back to, which I found was fascinating, they said, please do not look too much at other markets. Please do not look too closely at Silicon Valley or Israel. The Danish, Denmark, draw the best from them, but we need to have something that is really unique for New Zealand. And that's building on our Māori culture and values of care for land and people, of whānau, so that sense of collaboration and community, and thinking intergenerationally. It's amazed me how often that really resonates. And I think that's a great opportunity that if we can see ourselves working towards that for New Zealand and bringing in a culture of innovation where actually failure is just part of the road to success, where risk-taking is to be encouraged, and where we begin to have a far more agile mindset towards things. We all know that we have it, it's sort of part of our DNA, but how do we capture that and take it into the future and systemise that for New Zealand? So I am 1 minute and 29 seconds over. I probably didn't talk quite fast enough, but I wanted to say thank you and say, look, this is just a high-level summary. If I have an opportunity briefly afterwards, I'd be really happy to talk with people in more depth about some of these issues or to provide some backup. Thank you.